The hall was full, lights dimmed, and the air was heavy with anticipation. People leaned forward in their seats, waiting for the words that would follow. Keanu Reeves stood on the stage, his presence calm yet powerful, his eyes soft but filled with meaning. In front of him sat not just fans, but also artists, critics, and people who had carried years of their own struggles. Behind the lights of cameras, there was a silence so deep that even the sound of a breath felt loud. He began with a pause, long enough for people to wonder what he was about to say. Then he spoke slowly, with that gentle voice everyone knew. He said he wanted to talk about someone who had shaped his life in ways the world had never seen. He was not talking about fame, not about his career, but about a soul he deeply respected. It was about Sandra Bullock. The crowd shifted, surprised. Many thought he would talk about his new film or share a story about his past. But the direction he took pulled everyone closer. He said Sandra's soul was like light in the dark. She had carried kindness even when the world tried to weigh her down. She had offered help to people without asking for anything in return. As Keanu spoke, the screen behind him began showing small clips and photos from decades ago, moments that the audience had forgotten. There was Sandra smiling at fans in the rain, Sandra visiting a children's hospital late at night, Sandra giving her time to causes no one reported about. People stared at the screen in disbelief. These were not stories shared in the press. These were hidden acts of kindness. Keanu explained that when he was younger, he had faced days where he felt like he could not go on. Grief, loneliness, and the crushing silence of empty rooms had nearly broken him. And in one of those dark moments, Sandra had shown up without being asked. She had sat with him, no big words, no advice, just presence. She had brought coffee and laughed at nothing just to lighten the air. He said, "Sometimes the soul that saves you does not ask to be remembered, but I cannot let her go unseen." The audience listened, holding their breath. Keanu's voice trembled slightly, not out of weakness, but out of honesty. People felt the weight of his confession. It was not just about friendship. It was about how small, unseen acts can become lifelines in moments of despair. The silence deepened as he revealed another story. He remembered a day when the world judged him harshly, when headlines painted him as distant and cold. That evening, Sandra knocked on his door, carrying a handwritten note. On it, she had written, "You don't need to prove your worth. You already are enough." He kept that note folded in his wallet for years. Many in the crowd wiped their eyes. It was not the fame of Sandra Bullock they saw now, but the soul behind it. And in that moment, the story was not about two actors on stage. It was about the universal truth of kindness. Everyone had someone in their lives who had been their silent anchor, and Keanu's words brought those memories to the surface. Then came a twist no one expected. Keanu revealed that during one of his lowest points, when he had lost almost everything, Sandra secretly paid for his sister's medical care. She never told him until years later, when it accidentally came out in a conversation with a nurse. He said he was stunned because Sandra had done it quietly, without asking for thanks, without making it known to the world. Gasps filled the hall. The cameras captured faces filled with shock and respect. The truth landed heavy. This was not a story of Hollywood friends. This was a story of human souls standing for each other. Keanu took a deep breath and said, "People call me strong, but much of that strength came because someone believed in me when I could not believe in myself." Sandra Bullock is one of those people. Her soul is filled with light, and I want the world to know it. His words slowed, his tone softened, and the entire hall fell into silence. It was not the silence of boredom, but the silence of hearts being moved, of people realizing that fame does not protect from pain, and kindness does not need applause to be powerful. Somewhere in the audience, Sandra lowered her head, her eyes wet. She had not expected this. She had always wanted to keep those moments hidden, because to her, kindness was not for show. But now, hearing Keanu's voice, she realized that sometimes sharing kindness is not about pride. It is about teaching the world what love, humility, and respect can look like. As the first part of the story closed, the audience leaned even further in, hungry for what would come next. The suspense was not about a movie or a headline. It was about what more lay hidden in the bond between two souls who had carried each other through storms. The hall still carried the echo of Keanu's words. The audience sat frozen, some holding their hands to their mouths, others pressing tissues to their eyes. It felt like the entire world had slowed down, as if the air itself wanted to remember the moment forever. But Keanu was not done. He paused, looking down at the floor for a long time, then raised his eyes to the crowd again. The silence grew thicker, a silence that pulled everyone deeper into his story. He began softly, almost like he was sharing a secret that had been locked away for decades. "People often ask me how I survived the hardest years of my life," he said. "They ask about grief, about loss, about carrying pain that never truly goes away. I never gave them the full answer. But tonight, you deserve to know. The answer has a name, and that name is Sandra." His words struck like lightning. The crowd leaned in. They were ready for a new revelation, and he gave it to them without hesitation. Keanu told them about a night when he was drowning in sorrow after losing someone he loved. He remembered sitting alone in his apartment, the walls closing in, his mind sinking into darkness. The phone rang and he ignored it. Then came a knock at the door. When he opened it, there she was, Sandra Bullock, standing with 2 bags of groceries and a smile that didn't fade even when she saw his broken face. "She didn't say much," Keanu explained. "She just went to the kitchen, cooked pasta, and made me sit down. She told me, 'You don't have to eat it now, but I want you to know that someone cared enough to make it for you.'" That night, I didn't sleep in grief. I slept in gratitude. The audience was stunned. It wasn't about wealth, fame, or grand gestures. It was about something so simple, so human, that it cut through every heart in the room. But Keanu wasn't finished. He leaned closer to the microphone and lowered his voice, pulling everyone even tighter into his story. "There was another time," he said, "when I felt like walking away from everything. Movies, people, life itself. The weight was too heavy. And then, out of nowhere, I received a letter in the mail. There was no name on it, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Sandra's." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn, edges torn from years of being carried around. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. He didn't read the whole thing aloud, but he shared one line. "The world may not always be kind, but you can always choose to be." Gasps moved through the hall. Some people clutched their chests as if that one line had pierced them. Others nodded, whispering to themselves as if they were repeating the words to keep them alive inside. Keanu looked out at the sea of faces and smiled faintly. "I carried this letter with me everywhere. On sets, on planes, even to funerals. Because it reminded me that no matter how cruel life gets, kindness is still a choice." She gave me that reminder. She gave me a reason to keep moving. The hall erupted in quiet murmurs. People weren't just listening to a story anymore. They were looking inward at their own lives, their own storms, and the quiet souls who had helped them through. And then came a moment that no one expected. Keanu revealed something that had remained hidden for decades. He said there was a movie set where everything had gone wrong. The crew was stressed, the producers were angry, and he himself was exhausted, ready to break. During a break, Sandra sat beside him and whispered, "You know, they may see you as just an actor, but I see you as a soul who refuses to give up. Don't let this day take away what you've already survived." The words had changed him. He said, "That day, I realized she didn't just see me as Keanu the actor. She saw me as Keanu the human. And that gave me strength I didn't know I still had." The audience was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence this time. It was heavy with respect, with admiration, with love for a friendship that was built not on fame, not on glamour, but on soul-deep understanding. And then, just when everyone thought they had heard it all, Keanu revealed the biggest twist of the night so far. He said, "Many years ago, when I was struggling financially because of medical bills for my family, Sandra sent money through an anonymous foundation. She never told me. I only found out because the foundation sent me a letter of thanks, and her name slipped through by accident. When I confronted her, she smiled and said, 'I don't do it for recognition. I do it because I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent while you were suffering.'" The crowd gasped. Tears streamed down faces. Some people shook their heads in disbelief, unable to understand how such deep kindness could remain hidden for so long. Keanu's voice grew firm. She never wanted the world to know, but I can't stay silent anymore. I can't let the story of her soul remain in the shadows. Because if we don't speak about kindness, then the world forgets how powerful it really is. As he stepped back from the microphone, the audience didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They stayed completely silent, not because they were bored, but because they were overwhelmed. It was the kind of silence that comes when the heart is too full to make a sound. And in the front row, Sandra Bullock sat with tears glistening in her eyes. She tried to look away, embarrassed by the spotlight, but the people around her placed their hands on her shoulders, whispering words of admiration and respect. The night had shifted. It was no longer about awards, fame, or achievements. It was about the soul of a human being, revealed on stage by a friend who refused to let her light remain hidden. The night had already turned into something no one expected, but Keanu's pause on stage told the audience there was still more to come. His silence stretched long, heavy, almost uncomfortable until it transformed into suspense. The kind of suspense that makes people lean forward, eyes fixed, afraid to miss even one word. Keanu's hand brushed across the worn paper he had read from earlier, and then he looked up with a steady gaze. "You've heard stories of what Sandra has done for me," he said quietly. "But what you may not know is how much she has done for the world when no one was watching." That line alone shifted the energy in the room. Whispers broke out in the crowd. People wondered what he meant. Everyone knew Sandra as an actress, a star, a public figure, but Keanu was hinting at something hidden, something deeper, something the cameras had never captured. He began to tell them about a time when he had visited a small town that had been hit by a storm. Roofs were torn apart, families left homeless, and children clutched whatever scraps of belongings they had left. The town had no idea how to rebuild. "I arrived thinking I was the first to come," Keanu said. "But when I got there, I found out someone had already sent help. Food, clothes, and even small toys for the children. The boxes had no name, no label, but I asked around. And one old woman whispered to me, 'The quiet angel sent it.' Her name is Sandra." Gasps echoed through the hall. It wasn't charity for the cameras, it wasn't a staged gesture. It was quiet, silent, and real. "And she never told me," Keanu continued. "I only knew because that woman recognized her face from a magazine. Sandra had walked through that town weeks earlier, speaking to families, listening to their stories, making promises she later fulfilled. No red carpet, no headlines, just kindness." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some people shook their heads in disbelief. Others wiped away fresh tears. It was as if Keanu was pulling back a curtain, showing them a world of light they never knew existed. He leaned closer to the microphone. "But do you know what struck me the most? She didn't just bring food and clothes. She sat with a little boy who had lost his parents in the storm. He wouldn't talk to anyone. Sandra gave him her jacket, wrapped it around his shoulders, and whispered something to him. Years later, I met that boy again, now grown. He told me the words she spoke, 'You are not alone. The world still has people who care.' That one sentence changed his life. He went on to become a teacher. He told me he wanted to pass on the same hope she gave him." The audience erupted into soft sobs. It was too much for many to hold inside. They were witnessing not just a speech, but a series of revelations about the depth of one woman's soul. Keanu let the silence linger, and then he gave another story. "One time I was filming far from home, and my sister was in the hospital again. I couldn't be there, and I was breaking apart inside. I tried to keep working, but my heart wasn't in it. That's when I found out Sandra had been visiting her every single day. She read to her. She cooked meals for her, and she sat by her side. My sister later told me, she never let me feel like I was just a patient. She made me feel like family." The crowd gasped again. Some placed their hands over their mouths. The cameras panned across faces filled with awe. But Keanu's voice grew heavier now, slower, more emotional. There was also a moment that tested me. A moment when the world tried to make me bitter. I had been betrayed by people I trusted, and I felt myself hardening. I started to lose the softness I once carried. One night, Sandra showed up with 2 cups of tea. She sat across from me and said, "If you let the world turn your heart to stone, then the people who hurt you will win. Don't give them that victory. Stay kind even when it feels impossible. I didn't want to hear it then, but those words stayed with me. And because of her, I never let bitterness take over my soul. The audience broke into soft applause, but Keanu lifted his hand gently to quiet them again. "Wait," he said, "because there is more you need to know." He then revealed another shocking truth. Years ago, during a fundraiser, he noticed a large anonymous donation had saved a failing children's shelter. Later, through whispered conversations, he discovered it was Sandra. She had not only saved the shelter, but had secretly set up scholarships for children who grew up there. Many of those children later became doctors, artists, teachers. "She changed the course of their lives," Keanu said, his voice trembling. "And she never once stood on stage to take credit." The audience was stunned into silence again. They were no longer watching a simple tribute. They were being taken on a journey into the soul of a woman they thought they knew but clearly didn't. Keanu's eyes softened. "I've lived through tragedies, I've lost people I loved, I've felt pain so deep I thought I wouldn't survive it. But I am standing here today because someone else chose kindness again and again, not for the world to see, but for the people who needed it most. That someone is Sandra Bullock." He took a deep breath, his voice lowering to a whisper. "The truth is, I came here tonight not to praise myself, not to talk about my work, but to show you the kind of soul that inspires me to keep living. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. We don't survive because of fame or fortune. We survive because of kindness, and her kindness has been my greatest gift." The hall was heavy with emotion. The audience sat still, their eyes red, their hearts full. No one dared to break the silence with applause yet. They were holding on, waiting, knowing there was more to come, knowing Keanu had not reached the end of his revelations. And in the front row, Sandra covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed. She had spent her life hiding these acts, not wanting attention, but now the world knew, and the world was learning a lesson about humility, respect, and love. The audience thought they had reached the height of emotion, but Keanu's steady eyes told them they hadn't. He took another pause, longer this time, his silence building a tension that pressed against every chest in the room. People leaned forward without realizing it, their breathing shallow, their hearts already aching yet craving more. The lights above seemed to grow softer, as if even the stage wanted to respect the moment. "You've seen what she has done for me?" Keanu began, his voice low, steady, but edged with deep emotion. "And you've seen what she has done for strangers. But there's one truth that I need to share tonight. It's something that even Sandra herself may not know I discovered." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sandra herself shifted uncomfortably in the front row, her face wet with tears. Her hands pressed tightly together. Keanu continued, his words slow and deliberate, each one like a drop of water striking stillness. "Years ago, when I was drowning under loss, there was a foundation that stepped in quietly to help me and my family. I never knew who stood behind it, never asked. But one day, years later, I was handed an old file by mistake. In it was a single signature, hers. Sandra Bullock." The entire hall went still, as if the world itself had paused. Keanu's voice grew heavier. "She saved my family from breaking apart, and she never once said a word. She carried my pain silently, with no thought of thanks or recognition." Tears flowed freely in the audience now. No one even tried to hide it. People clutched each other's hands. Some whispered to themselves, as if reminding their hearts of someone who had once saved them in the same quiet way. But Keanu wasn't finished. He raised his head and spoke with a firmer voice. "But this is not just about me. I once followed the trail of kindness she left behind. I found letters, old receipts, and thank you notes she never showed anyone. They came from orphanages, from refugee shelters, from families who had lost everything. She gave again and again until she had nothing left to give. And when I asked her once why she did it, she said, because one small kindness might be the only light someone ever sees." The hall shook with sobs. People weren't just hearing a tribute anymore. They were being shown the unseen story of a woman they thought they knew, but never really did. And then Keanu shared something even more personal. He said, "There was a night when I was so broken that I didn't want to face tomorrow. I sat alone, staring at a bottle on the table, thinking maybe it would be easier if I didn't wake up. In that moment, I received a message on my phone. It was from Sandra. She didn't know what I was going through, but she wrote, "Hey, just checking in. I know life feels heavy sometimes. If you ever need someone to sit in silence with you, I'm here." The audience gasped, their hearts pounding. Many people covered their mouths, unable to handle the weight of what they were hearing. Keanu's voice shook slightly as he went on. "That message stopped me from making the worst choice of my life. She doesn't even know it until this moment." All eyes shot toward Sandra. Her head dropped, her shoulders trembling. The people beside her touched her arm gently, whispering words of comfort, while cameras captured the raw emotion on her face. Keanu then turned back to the crowd. "This is why I call her soul beautiful. Because beauty is not the smile you show the world, but the kindness you give when no one is looking, and she has given more than the world will ever know." But then came another twist, one that deepened the silence in the room. Keanu leaned forward, his tone quiet but filled with suspense. There was a time when she herself was broken. Her career had hit a wall, her personal life was falling apart, and she was carrying pain she never spoke about. Yet even in that storm, she was still helping others. I once asked her why she didn't rest, why she didn't take care of herself first. And she said, "If I stop giving, then my pain wins. But if I keep giving, then maybe someone else won't feel what I feel." The hall went silent again. The kind of silence that feels like a weight pressing down on every chest. People sat with wide eyes, stunned at the depth of humility and strength Keanu was revealing. His voice softened now, almost breaking. "She taught me something I will never forget. She taught me that resilience is not about pretending you're unhurt. Resilience is about choosing kindness even when you are hurting inside. That lesson is why I am still here. That lesson is why I can stand before you now." A few people clapped softly, but again the audience hushed itself quickly. No one wanted to break the sacred atmosphere Keanu's words had created. Then Keanu did something unexpected. He walked to the edge of the stage and looked directly at Sandra in the front row. His eyes glistened under the lights. "Sandra," he said, his voice trembling yet strong, "you have carried the world quietly on your shoulders. But tonight, I want the world to carry you. Tonight, I want them to see the soul I have seen all these years." The cameras turned toward her. Sandra shook her head, tears flowing, whispering, "Please don't." But the audience had already risen to their feet. They stood, clapping, not loudly, not in the way awards are celebrated, but slowly, softly, with reverence. It was not applause for a star. It was applause for a soul. Keanu let the moment stretch, his own eyes wet, his hand pressed to his heart. Then he said one last line that shook the hall. "The world celebrates fame, but tonight I celebrate something greater. Sandra Bullock's soul." The audience, still on their feet, did not roar with noise. They stood in silence, in respect, their hearts united in a moment they knew they would never forget. The hall had already witnessed revelations that felt larger than life, but the way Keanu stood still on stage told everyone there was another layer yet to come. His silence was no longer just a pause, it was a living force. People leaned forward without breathing too deeply, afraid to break the fragile air between his words. He finally spoke, and his voice carried the weight of something unspoken for decades. "You have seen what Sandra gave to others, but what you don't know is how much she has sacrificed. Sacrifices she never wanted the world to notice." The crowd froze, waiting. Sandra shifted in her seat, wiping her tears quickly as though trying to prepare herself for what was coming. Keanu's eyes softened, but his words struck deep. "There was a time when I believed I had lost my career, when roles stopped coming and the silence of rejection nearly consumed me. I found out later that Sandra had turned down projects so producers could take a chance on me instead. She did it in silence, never telling anyone, never taking credit. She chose to lose so that I could win." A loud gasp swept through the hall. People looked at each other, shocked beyond words. The idea that one of Hollywood's brightest stars had quietly given up her own opportunities just to lift someone else? It was unthinkable. Keanu continued, his voice trembling now. "I once asked her why she did it. She smiled and said, 'Sometimes one person's rise is worth more than your own spotlight. Because their survival matters too.'" Those words stayed with me forever. The audience was overwhelmed, but before the wave of emotion could settle, Keanu dropped another revelation. And it wasn't just me. I later discovered she secretly paid the tuition of young actors who couldn't afford training. One of them told me, "She believed in me before I even believed in myself." Today, that young man is a director who inspires the world. But he doesn't know it was her. He never knew. She wanted it that way. The murmurs grew. Some people covering their faces in disbelief, others nodding with respect. It wasn't charity. It was sacrifice. It was humility in its purest form. But Keanu's next words pulled the hall even deeper. "You think you know kindness. You think you've seen humility, but let me tell you about one moment that shattered me. Years ago, during the hardest days of my sister's illness, I had run out of strength. I was ready to sell everything I owned to keep her treatment going. Before I could, the bills were paid, anonymously. I thought it was some miracle. Months later, I found out it was Sandra. When I asked her why she didn't tell me, she said, "Because I didn't want you to feel you owed me. I just wanted you to feel free enough to breathe again." The audience gasped, some openly sobbing now. Sandra covered her face with her hands, her shoulders trembling under the weight of the truth being unveiled. Keanu's voice broke slightly as he continued. "I owe my sister's life to her kindness, and yet she never once asked for recognition. How many of us could do that? How many of us could give so deeply without asking for anything in return?" He let the silence answer. The hall was so quiet it felt like time itself had stopped. Then Keanu shared another secret, one that shocked even those closest to Sandra. Years ago, during a crisis when wildfires tore through communities, people lost homes, schools, memories. The first truck of supplies that arrived came from a donor who wished to remain unnamed. But I discovered later that it was Sandra. She didn't just send supplies. She traveled there herself, blending into the crowd, handing out food, hugging children, comforting parents. She stood in ash and smoke, covered in dust, and no one knew it was her. Because she didn't want cameras, she wanted humanity. The hall gasped again. People shook their heads, unable to believe the depth of her humility. Keanu took a deep breath, his voice soft but steady. And there was something else, something even more powerful. When I was at my lowest, when I doubted my worth, she once said to me, "You are not the roles you play. You are not the mistakes you made. You are the way you show up when someone needs you." Those words saved me more than once. And I know she has said the same to others, quietly, privately, leaving behind a trail of hope she never claimed as her own. His voice cracked now and tears ran freely down his face, but he didn't wipe them away. He let the audience see them, because they were not just his tears. They were the truth of his heart. Then he shared one final twist for the night, something that silenced even the whispers. "You may not know this, but when I once thought of leaving Hollywood forever, it was Sandra who convinced me to stay. She told me, 'Your art has saved more souls than you realize. Don't walk away because the world still needs your light.' I stayed, not because I believed in myself, but because she believed in me. And if I have ever inspired anyone, then the credit belongs to her." The audience broke again into soft sobs, some clutching their chests, others looking at Sandra with awe. Keanu stepped closer to the edge of the stage. His words grew slower, his tone heavier. "Tonight is not about my films or my life. Tonight is about honoring the soul that has quietly lifted me and so many others when the world wasn't looking. Tonight is about telling the truth that she tried to keep hidden. And that truth is this: Sandra Bullock is not just a star. She is a light in this world, a light that never asked to shine, but shines anyway." The hall erupted into a standing ovation. Not loud, not chaotic, but deep and respectful, like a wave of gratitude rising in unison. People cried, clapped softly, and bowed their heads, their hearts full. And in the front row, Sandra finally broke, her tears flowing freely as she whispered to herself, "This was never meant to be about me." But the world now knew, and the world would never forget. The ovation still echoed softly in the hall, like a heartbeat that refused to fade. But Keanu had not left the stage. He stood there, his hand resting against the microphone, his eyes on Sandra, and his voice carrying a weight that held everyone in place. "All of us," he began slowly, "we live with storms inside us. We carry grief, disappointment, fear. Sometimes we hide it behind smiles, sometimes behind silence. But what makes survival possible isn't strength alone. It's the kindness of someone who refuses to let you fall." The audience fell deeper into stillness. Every word sank into them like rain on dry ground. Keanu's voice softened. "For me, that person has been Sandra. And for many of you, there's someone too. A teacher, a parent, a friend, maybe even a stranger. Tonight isn't just about honoring her. It's about reminding ourselves that we survive because someone chose to care." He turned, gesturing toward the large screen behind him. Suddenly, a video began to play. It wasn't a film montage or a red carpet highlight. It was a collection of raw, unseen moments. Clips from hospitals, shelters, storm-hit towns, orphanages. Children hugging her, families thanking her, volunteers smiling with her. The room gasped as they realized these were the very moments Keanu had spoken of. The lights dimmed, and the hall was filled with the proof of everything he had revealed. Sandra's face appeared on the screen, sitting on a dusty floor with children around her, laughing. In another clip, she was carrying boxes of food, her hair tied back, no makeup, no spotlight, just humanity. The audience sat frozen, watching a side of her that was never meant for cameras, now shining larger than life. Sandra buried her face in her hands. She had never wanted the world to see this, but Keanu kept his eyes on her. He wasn't exposing her for glory. He was honoring her truth. When the video ended, the silence in the hall was unbearable, heavy with emotion. Keanu whispered into the microphone, This is who she is, and the world deserves to know." Then he did something no one expected. He stepped down from the stage and walked toward Sandra. The cameras followed every move. The audience rose, straining to see. He reached her, bent slightly, and held out his hand. "Sandra," he said, his voice trembling, "please, come stand with me. Let them see the soul I've been speaking of." She shook her head, whispering, "No, no," tears pouring down her cheeks. But Keanu gently took her hand, lifting her from her seat. The hall erupted, not in loud claps, but in a soft, respectful roar of emotion. People stood taller, wiping tears, their hearts racing. Together they walked to the stage. Sandra stood beside him, her head lowered, overwhelmed by the waves of love and respect pouring over her. Keanu turned back to the crowd. Look at her. Not as a star, not as a celebrity, but as a human soul who gave when no one asked, who carried when no one saw, who chose kindness even when she herself was hurting. The crowd rose in a full standing ovation now, louder, stronger, unstoppable. The hall shook with applause, but it wasn't empty noise. It was gratitude. It was love. It was the kind of applause that came from hearts transformed. Sandra finally lifted her head. Tears streamed down her face, but she managed to speak. Her voice was broken, fragile, but every word carried truth. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "Kindness. Kindness should never be a performance. It should be what we give quietly, without needing the world to see. But if tonight my story can remind even one person to choose compassion, then I will stand here, even if it breaks me." The audience erupted again, clapping through their own tears. Keanu placed a hand gently on her shoulder and said, "You're right. Kindness doesn't need applause. But sometimes the world needs reminders. And tonight, you are that reminder." Her lips trembled into a smile, and she lowered her head humbly. And then came the final moment, one that would be remembered for years. Keanu turned once more to the crowd and said, "Fame fades, awards fade, but souls live forever through the kindness they give. If you leave tonight with anything, let it be this. Be the reason someone else survives. Be the reason someone remembers that the world still has good." The hall roared, not with the usual chaos of celebrity events, but with a powerful, unified standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Some bowed their heads, some raised their hands, and many wept openly, knowing they had witnessed something beyond a speech. Sandra and Keanu stood side by side, not as actors, not as stars, but as two souls bound by respect, humility, resilience, and kindness. Their story had unfolded like a quiet storm, suspenseful, emotional, filled with unexpected truths, and had ended with a light brighter than any spotlight could ever shine. As the lights dimmed and the ovation continued, one truth became clear: the audience would never forget this night. They had not only seen two beloved figures, they had seen the power of kindness itself.